Lena Washington had no idea that the $500 she scraped together for a burned-out piano workshop was the key to a $463 million inheritance she never knew existed. Before we uncover the secrets hidden in the ashes, take a moment to subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge what you think you know. And let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. The key, cold and heavy in her hand, felt like the heaviest thing she had ever held. It wasn't the weight of the metal but the weight of the decision. A final, irreversible gamble made with the last of her savings and a sliver of borrowed hope. $500. It was her son Marcus's winter coat fund, next month's extra groceries, the buffer against an unexpected bill that always seemed to arrive with the sourest timing. Now it was just a receipt from a city auction, a piece of paper that gave her ownership of a ghost. The workshop stood on a forgotten street, wedged between a boarded-up laundromat and a chain-link fence that sagged like a tired sigh. It was a skeleton, a charcoal-black husk of a building that smelled of old rain and wet ash. The fire had been months ago, a footnote in the local paper about faulty wiring and a tragic loss for the city's dwindling artisan community. To everyone else, it was an eyesore. To Lena, it was a foundation, a flawed, scorched, and broken foundation, but one she could stand on. Her apartment, with its rattling pipes and a view of a brick wall, was a space she rented, a temporary holding cell in a life that felt perpetually on pause. This ruin was hers. She pushed open the door, which groaned in protest, its wood swollen and blackened. A cascade of dust motes danced in the single beam of afternoon light that pierced the gloom through a hole in the roof. The interior was a cavern of shadows and debris. The fire had devoured the roof in the center, leaving a jagged oculus open to the sky. Rain had washed clean streaks down the soot-stained walls, creating ghostly patterns that looked like weeping figures. The floor was a treacherous landscape of charred beams, shattered glass, and the skeletal remains of what were once magnificent pianos. A grand piano, its legs collapsed, lay on its side like a fallen beast, its ivory keys scattered like broken teeth. An upright stood against a far wall, miraculously intact but sealed in a black varnish of soot, its silence more profound than any note it had ever played. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The scale of the ruin was so much greater than it had seemed from the outside. Doubt, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of her resolve. What had she done? This wasn't a project. It was an archaeological dig. She had bought a grave. Marcus, her 10-year-old son, was the reason she was standing here. His quiet resilience, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about building things, the way he drew intricate designs for fantastical machines in the margins of his notebooks. He deserved more than a life spent watching his mother grow weary from 2 cleaning jobs, her hands raw from bleach and her spirit worn thin by the constant, grinding pressure of just getting by. She had seen the auction listing online, a fluke of late-night scrolling. Fire-damaged commercial property. Sold as is, the opening bid was a joke, a number so low it had to be a typo. But it wasn't. No one wanted a wreck. No one saw potential. But Lena, bone-tired and desperate for a sliver of control over her own destiny, saw a space. A place where she could maybe, just maybe, build something. A small furniture repair business. A studio. Something that was hers. Something for Marcus to inherit that wasn't a legacy of debt and struggle. She took a step inside, her worn sneakers crunching on the debris. The air was thick, still holding the ghost of the fire's fury. She ran a hand along a wall, her fingers coming away black. She could feel the history here, the echoes of creation and artistry, now silenced by destruction. For 2 days, she and Marcus worked. They wore thick gloves and particle masks, clearing away the debris bucket by bucket. It was slow, back-breaking labor. They filled trash bag after trash bag with charred wood, twisted metal strings, and unrecognizable lumps of melted varnish. Marcus, to her surprise, didn't complain. He worked with a quiet focus, his small brow furrowed in concentration. He saw it not as a ruin but as a puzzle. "Mom, look," he'd say, holding up a piece of intricate metalwork, miraculously undamaged. "What do you think this was for?" He was connecting with the ghost of the place, with the unknown craftsman who had worked here. On the third day, while clearing a collapsed section of shelving near the back wall, Lena's shovel struck something that wasn't wood or plaster. It was metal, and it made a dull, resonant thud. She knelt, her knees protesting on the gritty floor, and brushed away the ash and soot. A flat, dark surface emerged. It was a box, heavy and iron-bound, with no visible lock or seam. It was embedded in the floor, its top flush with the original concrete, hidden beneath the floorboards that had burned away. Her heart began to beat a little faster. It was probably nothing. Old tools. A cash box with a few forgotten dollars. But in the silence of the ruined workshop, with the light from the sky painting a perfect circle on the floor, it felt like something more. Felt like a secret. Marcus came over, his eyes wide. "What is it?" "I don't know," Lena breathed, her voice raspy from the dust. Together, they worked a crowbar under the edge. The box resisted, sealed tight by time and heat. With a final, desperate heave, the seal broke with a grating shriek of metal on concrete. The box was free. It was impossibly heavy, a solid cube of dark, pitted iron about 2 feet on each side. There was a simple, old-fashioned keyhole on the front, but no key. Lena's hope flickered. Another dead end. But as she ran her hand over the soot-covered surface, her fingers traced a small, almost invisible inscription near the base. Letters so faint they were more like a memory on the metal. Ignis non consumit omnia. Fire does not consume all. It was a promise, a defiance, a whisper from the past, telling her that even in the heart of the ruin, something had survived. The fire had taken the building, but it had not taken everything. Hidden within the ashes of her $500 gamble was a secret waiting to be unlocked, a story that had refused to burn. The iron box sat in the center of their small apartment living room, a dark, silent monolith that seemed to absorb the light around it. It had taken both of them, straining and grunting, to get it into the back of her rattling sedan and up the 3 flights of stairs. It was an anchor from another time, its presence making the worn furniture and peeling paint of their rented space feel even more temporary and flimsy. For hours, Lena searched for a way in. There was no key, and the lock was an intricate, star-shaped mechanism unlike anything she had ever seen. She tried prying at the lid, but the iron was seamless, a testament to a forgotten kind of craftsmanship. Marcus, ever the engineer, studied it from every angle, tapping it lightly with a hammer, listening to the sound. "It's solid," he declared with the gravity of a seasoned expert. But the lid sounds different. Thinner, exhausted, and covered in soot. Lena finally gave up on force and turned to ingenuity. She remembered an old locksmith, Mr. Chun, whose shop was a few blocks away, a tiny cluttered space filled with the scent of metal oil and the quiet ticking of 100 clocks. He was a relic himself, a man who understood the language of tumblers and springs. She took a photo of the lock and showed it to him the next morning. Mr. Chun peered at the image through thick spectacles, his brow furrowed. "Ah," he said, a sound of recognition and respect. "A Vance lock. Not seen one of these in 50 years. He was an artist, this one. Elias Vance. Made pianos, they say. But his locks were puzzles. No key made of metal will open this." Lena's heart sank. "Then how do I open it?" Mr. Chun smiled, a slow, knowing expression. "You do not open it with a key. You open it with a sequence." A song, he explained the legend. Elias Vance, the master craftsman who had once owned the workshop, believed that everything had a resonance, a frequency. His locks were not mechanical but harmonic. A specific series of pressures, applied in the correct rhythm and order around the face of the lock, would cause the internal tumblers, weighted like tiny tuning forks, to vibrate and align. It was, he said, impossible to pick and impossible to break. Could only be persuaded. For Lena, this was a revelation. The box wasn't just a container. It was an instrument. She returned to the apartment with a new sense of purpose. She looked at the star-shaped lock not as an obstacle, but as a piece of sheet music. There were 5 points on the star. A 5-note sequence. But which one? She spent the next 2 days in a state of focused obsession. She tried everything. Simple patterns. Complex rhythms. She thought about lullabies her grandmother used to sing, hymns from church, the scales Marcus was learning on his school-issued recorder. Each attempt was met with the same obdurate silence from the iron box. She was ready to give up, to accept that the secret was locked away forever, when Marcus, who had been watching her patiently, spoke up. "Mom," he said softly, "you're thinking too hard. Maybe it's not a song someone else wrote." He pointed to the faint inscription she had found on the box. "Ignis non consumit omnia." What if the name is the key? He meant the name Mr. Chun had mentioned. Elias Vance. Elias. 5 letters. 5 points on the star. It was so simple it felt impossible. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the box one last time. She assigned each letter a point on the star, moving clockwise from the top. E. A gentle, sustained press. Nothing. L. A short, sharp tap. A faint click echoed from within the box. A sound so small she thought she might have imagined it. I. Another sustained press. A second sharp tap. This time, a series of soft whirs, like a clockwork mechanism awakening from a long sleep. Her breath hitched. S. She pressed the final point, holding it down. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, with a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor, the lock disengaged. The lid, with no latch or handle, simply lifted a fraction of an inch with a sigh of released pressure. Lena and Marcus looked at each other, their faces a mixture of disbelief and awe. Slowly, reverently, Lena lifted the heavy iron lid. The air that escaped from within was dry and smelled of old paper and leather, a scent preserved for a century. The contents were not what she had expected. There was no treasure, no gold, no stacks of cash. The box was lined with faded velvet and filled with documents, each bundle tied neatly with a ribbon. At the top lay a thick, leather-bound journal, its cover stamped with the initials E. V. Beneath it were rolled-up schematics, brittle with age, covered in elegant, spidery handwriting and complex diagrams. There were photographs, sepia-toned portraits of a proud, serious-looking black man with intelligent eyes, standing beside magnificent, ornate pianos. And at the very bottom, nestled in a velvet cutout, was a single ornate key. It was made of brass, its head shaped like a musical treble clef, its shaft intricately carved. It was beautiful, but it was just one key. Disappointment, sharp and unwelcome, washed over Lena. All that work, all that mystery, for a box of old papers. She had let her imagination run wild, picturing a life-altering discovery that would solve all her problems. Instead, she had found a family scrapbook belonging to a stranger. "Is that it?" Marcus asked, his voice small. "Just paper." Lena forced a smile, ruffling his hair. "It's history, sweetie. Someone's life is in this box." She picked up the journal. The leather was supple, the pages thick and creamy. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was a work of art, each letter a deliberate, graceful stroke. The date was April 12, 1888. "My name is Elias Vance," the entry began, "and I have discovered a new way to hear the world." As Lena began to read, the sounds of the city outside, the traffic, the sirens, the distant shouts, faded away. The small, cramped apartment dissolved around her, replaced by the world of Elias Vance. A world of sound and vibration, of wood and wire and resonant frequencies. A world of brilliant creation, and of a slow, creeping betrayal that would stretch across a century to find her in the ruins of his workshop. The disappointment was gone, replaced by a profound and unnerving curiosity. This was not a stranger's story. She didn't know how, but she felt an undeniable connection to the man who wrote these words, a pull of recognition that resonated deep in her bones. This box did not contain a treasure. It was the map to one. The journal of Elias Vance became Lena's world. For days, she did little else but read, absorbing the life of a man she had never known but who felt closer to her than a memory. Marcus would sit beside her, quietly doing his homework, occasionally looking up to ask questions as she read passages aloud. Elias's voice, elegant and precise, rose from the century-old pages, painting a vivid picture of a world both foreign and familiar. He was born the son of a freed slave in the South, a boy who found his calling not in the fields or the factories, but in the discarded husk of a spinet piano left to rot in a barn. He taught himself to repair it, then to improve it, his hands and mind possessing an intuitive understanding of acoustics and mechanics that bordered on genius. He wrote of his journey north, of the prejudice he faced, of the workshops that turned him away, and of his unshakable belief in his own vision. Finally, he established his own small workshop in the very building Lena now owned, a place where he was free to experiment, to build instruments that were not just tools for music, but conduits for what he called the pure voice of the wood. The journal was filled with his theories on sympathetic resonance, on the mathematical relationship between the grain of a piece of spruce and the overtone of a struck string. It was poetry and physics intertwined. But the story took a dark turn with the introduction of a man named Alistair Sterling. Sterling was a businessman, a man with capital and connections but no vision of his own. He saw the genius in Elias's work and offered him a partnership. Elias, eager for the resources to realize his grandest designs, accepted. Together, they founded the Sterling Vance Acoustic Company. For a time, the partnership flourished. Elias's pianos became renowned among the city's elite for their unparalleled tone and innovative design. But Sterling was interested in more than just pianos. He was fascinated by Elias's more experimental work, detailed in the latter half of the journal. Elias had been developing something he called the resonance engine, a device that used a series of tuned forks and magnetic coils to amplify and clarify sound waves. It was a revolutionary concept, a precursor to modern acoustic amplification. The schematics in the box were not for pianos. They were for this engine. Sterling saw its potential not for art, but for industry, telegraphy, broadcasting, military applications. He pushed Elias to abandon his pianos and focus solely on the engine, to patent it under the company name. Elias, a purist, refused. He believed the technology should serve music, not commerce or conflict. The disagreement festered, turning from a business dispute into a bitter, personal conflict. Sterling, using his social standing and legal savvy, began to systematically push Elias out of his own company. He manipulated the ledgers, forged documents, and filed patents for simplified, monetizable versions of Elias's work under his own name alone. The journal entries grew shorter, tinged with a growing sense of paranoia and despair. "He is stealing my voice," Elias wrote one night. "He takes my ideas from my head before I can give them form, and he twists them into something ugly, something loud and artless. He is building an empire of echoes, and I am becoming the ghost in his machine." The final entries were frantic. Elias wrote of threats of Sterling's men watching the workshop. He knew he was losing the fight. He had hidden his most important work, the original schematics for the resonance engine, the signed partnership agreement proving his co-ownership of the company, and his personal journals in the fireproof box, a vault of his own design. The last entry was dated October 29, 1899. "There will be a fire tonight. Sterling has made it clear. He means to burn my work, to burn my name from the pages of history. But he does not know my heart is made of iron. He thinks he is destroying the root, but he is only burning the leaves. A legacy is not a thing of paper or wood. It is a seed. And this seed, I plant in darkness, and wait for the sun." Lena closed the journal, her hands shaking. The Sterling Vance Acoustic Company. She had never heard of it. But Elias had written that Sterling planned to rename it, to erase the Vance name entirely. He had speculated on a new name, something modern and imposing. Viridian Dynamics. The name hit Lena like a physical blow. Viridian Dynamics was one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world. They were everywhere, in phones, in computers, in satellites, in military contracts. They had built their foundation on acoustic and signal processing technology. An empire of echoes. Lena felt a cold, creeping certainty. This wasn't just history. This was theft on a scale so vast it was almost incomprehensible. She looked at the sepia photograph of Elias Vance, at his proud, determined face. He wasn't just a stranger. The high cheekbones, the set of his jaw, the intensity in his eyes. She saw a faint but undeniable echo of her own father, of her grandfather. A seed planted in darkness. He was her ancestor, her great-great-grandfather. The realization settled not with a shout, but with a quiet, profound weight. The ruin she had bought was not just a building. It was her birthright. The box was not a collection of papers. It was a testament. And the injustice done to Elias Vance was not a historical footnote. It was a debt owed to her, to Marcus, to the family line he had fought to preserve. She knew she couldn't do this alone. The story was too big, the opponent too powerful. She needed someone who could see the connections she was only just beginning to grasp. Someone who could read the map this journal had laid out. She thought of Mr. Abernathy, a retired history teacher and local activist who ran a small, cluttered community archive out of his storefront. He was a keeper of the city's forgotten stories, especially the stories of its black community, which were so often paved over and ignored. He was her only hope. The next morning, with the iron box loaded into her car once again, Lena drove to Mr. Abernathy's archive, the leather-bound journal resting on the passenger seat beside her like a silent, waiting passenger. She was no longer just a struggling single mother. She was the custodian of a secret, the inheritor of a battle she never knew was being fought. The seed, after more than a century in the dark, was beginning to feel the sun. The bell above the door of the Westwood Community Archive chimed softly, announcing Lena's arrival into a space that smelled of aging paper, lemon polish, and quiet dedication. The archive was a single, long room, its walls lined floor to ceiling with mismatched shelves overflowing with books, binders, and carefully labeled document boxes. In the center of the room, amidst towers of research materials, sat a man who seemed as much a part of the collection as the artifacts themselves. Mr. Abernathy was a small, slender man in his late 70s, with a halo of white hair and eyes that sparkled with an unquenchable curiosity behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He looked up from a large, fragile map he was examining and gave Lena a warm, welcoming smile. "Lena Washington, it's been too long. What treasure have you brought me today?" His voice was a gentle baritone, soothing and authoritative at once. Lena had known him peripherally for years, a respected elder in the community, but she had never sought his counsel before. Now she felt as if she were making a pilgrimage. She placed the heavy journal on his desk, her hands unsteady. "Mr. Abernathy," she began, her voice catching slightly. I think I found something for the next 2 hours." Lena recounted the entire story. The auction, the burned workshop, the iron box, the harmonic lock, and the contents within. Mr. Abernathy listened with rapt attention, his sharp eyes never leaving her face. He didn't interrupt, didn't question, simply absorbed her words, nodding slowly as the incredible tale unfolded. When she finished, he reached out a careful, deliberate hand and placed it on the cover of Elias Vance's journal. "May I?" he asked softly. Lena nodded, and he opened the book, his fingers tracing the elegant script as if reading Braille. He was silent for a long time, turning the pages with a historian's reverence. He examined the photographs, studied the schematics, his expression shifting from curiosity to profound astonishment, and finally to a grim, simmering anger. "I know this story," he whispered, more to himself than to Lena. "Or rather, I know the ghost of it. A whisper in the city's history. The brilliant piano maker who vanished. The workshop fire that was never properly investigated. The official record says he was a man in debt who fled after the fire, a failure. But there were always rumors that his work was stolen, that he was silenced." He looked up at Lena, his eyes locking onto hers. "This journal, this is the truth. This is the history that was buried." He turned his attention to the schematics, spreading them carefully on the large table. His brow furrowed as he studied the intricate diagrams of the resonance engine. "Lena, this is far more than a simple amplifier. The principles here, the use of harmonic cancellation and wave reinforcement, This is the foundational technology for half of the things Viridian Dynamics has built its fortune on. Noise-canceling headphones, ultrasonic imaging, long-range acoustic devices. The seeds of it all are right here, on this paper, drawn by your great-great-grandfather's hand. Lena felt a wave of dizziness. It was one thing to feel an ancestral injustice. It was another to see the tangible proof of it laid out in front of her. What does it all mean, Mr. Abernathy? In terms of now? Mr. Abernathy leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant, calculating. It means that Viridian Dynamics is a 100-year-old crime scene. Their origin story, their foundational patents are built on a lie, a theft. Your family was robbed not just of money, but of a legacy that should have shaped the world. He steepled his fingers, his expression turning intensely serious. We must be very, very careful. A corporation like Viridian doesn't get to be that powerful by playing fair. They have buried this truth for over a century. They will not take kindly to having it unearthed. He spent the rest of the afternoon making calls, speaking in low, coded tones to a network of contacts Lena couldn't begin to imagine. Patent lawyers, forensic accountants, intellectual property experts. While he worked, Lena explored the archive, the weight of her discovery settling upon her. She was standing in a room dedicated to preserving the stories that power tried to erase, and she had just walked in with the biggest one of all. Late in the day, Mr. Abernathy hung up the phone, a look of grim confirmation on his face. He had spoken to a friend, a retired financial analyst who had done some preliminary research. Lena, he said, his voice heavy, I asked my friend to calculate a conservative estimate. Based on the foundational patents that can be directly traced back to the principles in these schematics, and accounting for a century of compound growth, licensing fees, and stock valuation, the inheritance you were denied, the wealth that was stolen from your family, is worth, at a minimum, $463 million. The number hung in the air of the dusty archive, an impossible, astronomical figure that had no place in Lena's world of overdue bills and second-hand clothes. $463 million. It wasn't a number. It was a weapon. It was a kingdom. It was a weight so immense she felt she might collapse beneath it. She sank into a chair, her mind reeling. The $500 she had spent on the workshop felt both like the most foolish and the most brilliant decision of her entire life. She thought of Marcus, of the future she could give him. Schools, travel, security. Everything she had ever dreamed of for him. But she also thought of Elias Vance, of his fury and his hope, of the seed he had planted in the dark. This wasn't just about the money. It was about his name. It was about correcting the history that had been stolen from them. What do we do now? She asked, her voice a near whisper. Mr. Abernathy looked at her, his expression a mixture of pride and solemn warning. Now, my dear, we prepare for a war. And the first shot will not be fired by us. It will be fired by them. They don't know that you've found this yet, but they will. And when they do, they will come for it. He was right. The moment she decided to pursue this, she was painting a target on her back. The world she knew, the simple, difficult life of an anonymous single mother, was over. She was now the guardian of a $463 million secret, and the enemy she was about to face was an empire. The quiet that followed the revelation in Mr. Abernathy's archive was a fragile, temporary thing, like the calm before a storm. Lena returned to her life, but everything was different. The world looked the same cracked sidewalks, the same bus to her cleaning job, the same weary faces of her fellow passengers. But it felt fundamentally altered, as if she were viewing it through a new lens. The knowledge of the inheritance hummed beneath the surface of every moment. A constant, low-frequency vibration that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She told no one, not even Marcus. How could she explain a sum of money that neither of them could truly comprehend? How could she burden him with a secret so vast and dangerous? For now, she protected him with her silence, even as the weight of it pressed down on her. Mr. Abernathy had counseled patience. They have the power, but we have the truth, he'd said. And the truth is a patient weapon. We must gather our own forces before we reveal our position. He began the slow, meticulous process of authenticating the journal, verifying the age of the ink and paper, and having experts discreetly analyze the schematics. Every step was taken with extreme caution, creating a chain of evidence that would be unimpeachable. Lena, meanwhile, continued her work at the workshop. The physical labor was a relief, a way to quiet the storm in her mind. Clearing the debris, sorting the salvageable wood, feeling the satisfying ache in her muscles at the end of the day, it grounded her. The workshop was no longer just a desperate gamble. It was a sacred place, a monument to Elias. She felt his presence in the silence, his spirit in the stubborn resilience of the surviving structure. The first sign that they had been discovered came not with a bang, but with a whisper. It arrived in a crisp, cream-colored envelope, delivered by courier to her apartment. The return address simply read, Viridian Dynamics, Office of the General Counsel. Her blood ran cold. She opened it with trembling fingers. The letter inside was polite, formal, and utterly chilling. It stated that Viridian, as part of its corporate heritage program, was aware of her recent acquisition of a property with historical ties to one of the company's early innovators. They were interested in acquiring any and all historical artifacts from the site for their corporate museum. They offered her a sum of $25,000 for the contents of the property and a release of all claims. $25,000. A month ago, that sum would have been a miracle, a life-altering jackpot that would have solved every immediate problem she had. It was a down payment on a small house, a college fund for Marcus, a way out. Now it was an insult. It was a test. They were probing, trying to see what she knew, how much she valued what she had. They were dangling a life raft in front of a drowning woman, not knowing she had just discovered she was the rightful heir to the entire ocean. She immediately took the letter to Mr. Abernathy. He read it, his lips tightening into a thin, hard line. "It's begun," he said quietly. "They must have an alert system, something that tracks property sales connected to their history. They know someone bought the workshop. They don't know what you've found yet, but they're not taking any chances. This offer is designed to make you go away quietly." "What should I do?" Lena asked, her voice tense. "For now, nothing. A lack of response is, in itself, a response. It will make them nervous. It will tell them you are not as simple as they hoped." A week later, the other shoe dropped. A woman appeared at Lena's apartment door. She was impeccably dressed in a severe, dark gray suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight, flawless chignon. She introduced herself as Miss Thorne, a representative from Viridian Dynamics. She was not a lawyer, she explained with a smile that didn't reach her cold, blue eyes, but a historical acquisitions specialist. Her presence filled the small apartment, her expensive perfume clashing with the lingering scent of bleach and cooked cabbage. She spoke in smooth, reasonable tones, reiterating the company's generous offer. "Ms. Washington," she said, her gaze sweeping over the cramped living room, taking in the worn sofa and the stack of bills on the small table. "We understand that $25,000 is a significant sum. It could provide a fresh start for you and your son, a chance to move beyond." The unspoken judgment was clear. She was sizing Lena up, classifying her as poor, desperate, and easily bought. Lena felt a surge of anger, but she remembered Mr. Abernathy's advice. She remained calm, her expression unreadable. "I'm not sure I'm ready to sell," Lena said, her voice even. "The workshop has sentimental value." Thorne's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sentiment is a luxury, Ms. Washington. Security is a necessity. Viridian is prepared to be very generous to honor the memory of artisans like Mr. Vance. We could even increase our offer to $50,000. For you, that would be a fortune. Think of what you could do for your boy." This was the first moral test, the first true dilemma.
$52,000.
It was real, it was tangible. It was a guaranteed escape from the grinding poverty that defined her life. The path of justice, the fight for the full inheritance, was an uncertain, dangerous road with no guarantee of success. She could be crushed by Viridian's power, left with nothing but the ashes she started with. All she had to do was sign a paper, hand over the box, and walk away. She could give Marcus a better life right now. But she looked at Miss Thorne's predatory smile, at the cold calculation in her eyes, and she thought of Elias Vance's final journal entry. He thinks he is destroying the root, but he is only burning the leaves. To accept this money would be to help Alistair Sterling burn the leaves all over again. It would be a betrayal of the legacy that had fallen into her hands. It would be teaching her son that their history, their truth, was for sale. "Thank you for the offer, Miss Thorne," Lena said, her voice ringing with a newfound clarity and strength she didn't know she possessed. "But my history is not for sale." She opened the door, a clear dismissal. Miss Thorne's mask of polite concern vanished, replaced by a flash of cold fury. The veneer of the acquisitions specialist fell away, revealing the enforcer beneath. "You are making a grave mistake," Thorne said, her voice low and menacing. "You have no idea what you are dealing with. Viridian Dynamics was built by men who knew how to take what they wanted. We have not forgotten how." The threat hung in the air long after the door was closed. Lena leaned against it, her heart pounding. The first shot had been fired. She had refused to be bought. Now she would find out what it meant to be broken. The consequences of Lena's refusal were not immediate or overt. Viridian Dynamics was too sophisticated for clumsy, obvious threats. Their retaliation was a slow, creeping constriction, a methodical dismantling of her already fragile life, designed to isolate and terrify her into submission. It began with her apartment. 2 weeks after Ms. Thorne's visit, an eviction notice appeared on her door. The official reason was a litany of minor, previously ignored infractions. A small crack in a window pane, a late rent payment from 6 months prior, a complaint about Marcus's excessive noise from a neighbor she had never even spoken to. Her landlord, a man who had always been friendly and lenient, suddenly refused to take her calls. He had been bought or intimidated. She had 30 days to leave. The place wasn't much, but it was their home. The thought of being on the street, of Marcus having no place to sleep, was a primal fear that clawed at her throat. Panic set in, cold and sharp. Next came her job. She worked for a commercial cleaning company, a large, faceless corporation that serviced downtown office buildings, including, she realized with a sickening lurch, the regional headquarters of Viridian Dynamics. Her supervisor called her into his office, his face a mask of false sympathy. He informed her that due to corporate restructuring, her position was being eliminated. When she pressed him, asking why she was the only one being let go, he couldn't meet her eye. "It's out of my hands, Lena," he mumbled. The order came from the top. She was fired. Her only source of income was gone, severed with the sterile, impersonal efficiency of a corporate memo. The message was clear. Viridian's reach was long. They could touch any part of her life, squeeze it, and watch her suffocate. She was being systematically stripped of her stability, her resources, her ability to fight back. The pressure was immense, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. Sleep offered little escape, her dreams filled with images of fire and falling. Every creak of the apartment building at night sounded like a threat. Every unfamiliar car parked on her street seemed to be watching her. She was consumed by a gnawing paranoia that was, she knew, entirely justified. She saw Miss Thorne's cold eyes everywhere. During this time, the burned-out workshop became her only sanctuary. It was the one place that was truly hers, the one place their influence couldn't yet touch. She and Marcus spent their days there, the methodical work of clearing and cleaning a balm for her frayed nerves. They sorted through the debris, finding small, beautiful remnants of Elias's life. A set of perfectly balanced wood-carving tools, a box of glass lantern slides showing the phases of piano construction, a single, petrified rose pressed between the pages of a book on wood joinery. Each discovery was a small act of defiance, a reclamation of the history Viridian sought to erase. One afternoon, as she sat on an overturned crate, staring at the growing pile of eviction notices and final bills, despair washed over her. Maybe Thorne was right. Maybe she had made a grave mistake. What right did she have to subject Marcus to this? To risk their safety, their very survival, for a historical injustice? The $463 million felt like a fantasy, a cruel joke, while the reality of homelessness was a very real and immediate threat. Marcus, sensing her distress, came and sat beside her. He didn't say anything, just leaned his head against her shoulder. His small, steady presence was an anchor in the storm of her fear. She looked at him, at his trusting, innocent face, and the reason for her fight came rushing back with overwhelming force. This wasn't just for her. It was for him. It was to give him a world where his history mattered, where his ancestors weren't erased, where his potential wasn't limited by the circumstances of his birth. It was to teach him that integrity was worth more than comfort, that some things were not for sale, no matter the price. The despair receded, replaced by a hard, cold anger. They thought they could break her by taking away her job, her home. They didn't understand. She had been poor her whole life. She had been struggling to survive since the day she was born. They were threatening her with a reality she already knew intimately. They thought her poverty was her weakness, but she would make it her strength. She knew how to live on the edge. She knew how to endure. They had taken everything from her, which meant she now had nothing left to lose. "They will not break us," she whispered, more to herself than to Marcus. She stood up, her back straight, her resolve forged into steel in the crucible of Viridian's pressure. She looked around the cavernous, fire-scarred workshop. This was her fortress. The ghost of Elias Vance was her ally. The truth was her weapon. The battle had moved beyond legal claims and financial settlements. It had become a fight for her soul. She went to see Mr. Abernathy, not with fear in her eyes, but with fire. "They're trying to bury me," she said, her voice low and steady. "They think I'll give up." "They're wrong," Mr. Abernathy nodded, a look of solemn pride on his face. "Poverty can be a prison, Lena, but for those who learn to live within its walls, it can also be a training ground. They have underestimated you. They have mistaken desperation for weakness." He then revealed that he had not been idle. While she had been under siege, he had been marshalling their own forces. He had secured the services of a pro bono law firm, a group of young, idealistic lawyers who specialized in fighting corporate malfeasance. He had also found a safe place for her and Marcus to stay, a small cottage owned by a sympathetic history professor who was on sabbatical. "You are not alone in this fight," he assured her. "An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us." Lena felt a profound sense of gratitude, a feeling of community that was the direct opposite of the isolation Viridian had tried to impose. They had stripped her of her apartment and her job, but they had given her something far more valuable in return. A cause, a community, and an unshakable sense of her own strength. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Lena Washington knew without a doubt that she was going to win. With a safe place to live and a legal team, however small, behind her, the crushing weight of sheer survival began to lift, replaced by a focused strategic purpose. The fight shifted from a defensive struggle to a proactive investigation. The lawyers handled the harassment from Viridian, building a case for corporate intimidation, while Lena and Mr. Abernathy focused on the one piece of the puzzle that still felt incomplete: the ornate, brass key from the iron box. It was the only item that seemed to have no immediate connection to the journal or the schematics. It didn't fit any lock in the workshop, and its design, a treble clef, suggested a meaning beyond a simple door. It was a question mark, a loose thread, and Lena felt instinctively that it was important. For weeks they pursued dead ends. They checked old property records for other buildings Elias might have owned. They researched safe deposit boxes at banks that had existed in his time. The key remained a silent, beautiful enigma. The breakthrough, when it came, was not from a historical document or an expert's analysis, but from the fresh eyes of a child. Marcus had been spending his afternoons after school at the archive, a place he had come to love. He was fascinated by the old maps, especially a huge, detailed 1895 plat map of the city that Mr. Abernathy had framed on the wall. One afternoon, while Lena and Mr. Abernathy were poring over Elias's journal for the 100th time, Marcus, who had been examining the key, let out a small gasp. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with the thrill of discovery. "Look," he held the key up against the glass of the map. He was pointing to the cartouche, the decorative emblem in the corner of the map that contained the title and scale. The border of the cartouche was an intricate design of scrolling vines and musical notes. and woven into the design, almost hidden, was a symbol identical to the treble clef head of the key. It was a maker's mark, an artist's signature. Lena and Mr. Abernathy rushed over. Below the cartouche, in tiny print, were the credits for the map's creation. Surveyed by the Office of the City Engineer. Cartography and design by E. Vance. Elias Vance wasn't just a piano maker. He was a draftsman, an artist, a cartographer. He had helped design the official map of the city. "He's showing us something," Mr. Abernathy breathed, his eyes wide. He hid the location in plain sight, on a document that would be in every city office, every library. A secret for anyone with the key to see. But what was the secret? The treble clef on the map wasn't pointing to a specific location. It was just a design. Marcus, however, saw it differently. "It's not pointing," he said, his finger tracing the air. "It's framing," he was right. The position of the clef in the corner cartouche, when viewed in relation to the map's grid, created a specific focal point. It framed one building in particular, the Grand Criterion Theater, the city's oldest and most venerated concert hall. According to the city records Mr. Abernathy quickly pulled up, the theater was built in 1892. And the chief acoustic designer, the man responsible for its famously perfect sound, was listed as a consultant from the Sterling Vance Acoustic Company, Elias Vance. "He built a vault," Lena whispered, the pieces clicking into place with dizzying speed. "He didn't just hide his papers. He built a place to hide the proof the Grand Criterion was still a functioning theater, a historical landmark." Getting inside to search for a hidden vault that may or may not exist was an impossible task. But Elias, as always, had left a path. In the journal, in a section describing his work on the theater, he wrote about his pride in the non-Euclidean geometry of the main ventilation shafts, designed to carry sound away from the auditorium without creating echoes. He included a small, seemingly irrelevant diagram of the system's access panel, located in a sub-basement storage room. On that diagram was a tiny, almost invisible marking, the same star shape as the lock on the iron box. It was a signpost, left for someone who knew his language of symbols. Gaining access was the next hurdle. Mr. Abernathy, using his network, discovered that a historical society was conducting a tour of the theater's backstage areas the following Saturday. It was their only chance. Lena felt a tremor of fear. This was moving beyond researching documents and into something far more dangerous. This was trespassing. This was a heist. But the potential reward, the final, irrefutable proof they needed, was too great to ignore. On Saturday, Lena and Mr. Abernathy joined the tour group, trying to look like casual history buffs. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs as the tour guide led them through dusty corridors and past cavernous storage rooms filled with old props and scenery. She clutched the brass key in her pocket, its metal cool against her skin. While the guide was engrossed in a long story about a famous actor's ghost, Mr. Abernathy created a small diversion, feigning a dizzy spell. In the confusion, Lena slipped away, following the remembered path from Elias's diagram. She found the sub-basement, a dark, damp space that smelled of mildew and decay. And on the far wall, behind a stack of rotting wooden crates, was a metal panel, just as the diagram had shown. Her hands were shaking as she cleared the crates away. There it was, rusted but unmistakable. A small, five-pointed star etched into the metal. There was no handle, no lock. Remembering the lesson of the iron box, she knew it wasn't about force. It was about resonance. She pressed the points in the same sequence as before, ELIAS. With a low groan of protesting metal, a hidden latch released, and the panel swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage. She hesitated for only a second, then took a deep breath, pulled a small flashlight from her bag, and stepped into the darkness, into the secret heart of the theater, a space that had been waiting for over a century for someone to find the right key and play the right song. The passage was cold and silent, a forgotten artery in the living body of the theater. The air in the passage was thick and stale, the silence absolute. Lena's small flashlight beam cut a nervous path through the oppressive darkness, revealing walls of rough-hewn stone and a floor thick with the undisturbed dust of 100 years. The passage sloped gently downward, leading her deeper beneath the foundations of the Grand Criterion. Every step echoed, unnaturally loud in the profound quiet. She felt like an intruder in a tomb, a trespasser in Elias Vance's final, secret sanctuary. Her fear was a living thing, a cold presence at her back, but the feeling of purpose, of being on the cusp of a monumental discovery, pushed her forward. After about 50 feet, the narrow passage opened into a small circular chamber. In the center of the chamber stood a heavy iron door, set directly into the stone. It was not a door to a room, but the door to a vault. And in the center of the door was a single ornate keyhole, shaped like a treble clef. This was it, the lock the key was made for. Her hand trembled as she slid the brass key from her pocket. It felt warm, alive. She inserted it into the lock. It slid in perfectly, a seamless fit, as if it had been waiting. She turned it. The sound of the tumblers shifting was incredibly loud in the silence, a series of satisfying, heavy clicks that resonated through the stone floor. With a final thud, the bolt retracted. She pulled the heavy door open, its hinges groaning in protest after a century of stillness. The air that flowed out was cool and dry, carrying the faint, clean scent of machine oil and cedar. She shone her light inside. It was a small, walk-in vault, its walls lined with shelves made of dark, polished wood. And on the shelves, preserved in the dry, stable atmosphere, was the legacy of Elias Vance. It was the smoking gun they had been searching for. On one shelf sat a working prototype of the resonance engine. It was a beautiful object, a complex assembly of brass, copper wire, and precisely cut crystal that looked like a piece of scientific sculpture. Even in the dim light, it seemed to hum with latent energy, a sleeping giant of technology. On another shelf were stacks of documents, far more than had been in the first box. There were the original, signed, and notarized partnership agreements between Elias Vance and Alistair Sterling, clearly stating a 50-50 ownership of the Sterling Vance Acoustic Company and all its intellectual property. There were Elias's personal copies of the initial patent filings, which listed him as the primary inventor. And there was a packet of letters, written in Sterling's own hand. Lena picked one up and read it, her blood turning to ice. The letters were a chronicle of the betrayal, undisguised threats and demands for Elias to sign away his rights. "You will be forgotten, Vance," the last letter read. "Your name will be a footnote on a burned-out building. I am the future, and you are just the ghost that powers it. Sign the papers or I will see to it that you are silenced permanently." It was irrefutable proof of the theft, the coercion, the conspiracy. Sterling hadn't just stolen Elias's work, he had threatened his life. He had orchestrated the fire not just to destroy the workshop, but to erase the man himself. But the most powerful discovery was a small, unassuming ledger book. Lena opened it. It was Elias's private account book. In it, he had meticulously documented a series of transactions. Small, regular payments made to a trust he had established. The trust was set up to hold his 50% share of the company's stock, to be managed by a small, independent bank until such time as his direct descendants could claim it. He had foreseen the theft and created a legal firewall, a dormant entity that held his stolen fortune in trust for a future he believed in. He had never given up his ownership. He had simply hidden it, protected it, and left a trail for his family to follow. This was the final piece. They didn't just have a moral claim to the fortune. They had a direct, legally documented, unbroken chain of ownership. Viridian Dynamics didn't just owe them money for stolen patents. They owed them half the company. Lena began to carefully pack the most critical documents, the partnership agreement, Sterling's threatening letters, the trust documents, into her bag. She couldn't take the resonance engine, but she had what mattered most. The proof. As she was about to leave, her light caught something on the back wall of the vault. It was a simple, tintype photograph in a small wooden frame. It was a picture of Elias Vance, but he was not alone. He was standing with his arm around a young woman, and holding the hand of a small boy who looked to be about Marcus's age. His wife and son. His reason for fighting. On the back of the frame, in Elias's script, were the words, "My legacy is not in my work, but in them." May they build a better world with the tools I leave behind. Tears streamed down Lena's face. The century that separated them collapsed in that moment. She was not just a descendant seeking a fortune. She was a daughter, a mother, answering the call of an ancestor who had placed his faith in a future he would never see. She closed the vault door, leaving the key in the lock. His purpose was served. Her journey into the past was over. Now, the battle for the future was about to begin. She made her way back through the passage, her bag heavy with the weight of truth. When she emerged back into the sub-basement, she found Mr. Abernathy waiting, his face etched with worry. He saw the bag, saw the look in her eyes, and his expression changed to one of dawning, triumphant realization. "You found it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Everything?" Lena replied, her own voice shaking with the enormity of it all. "We have everything." They slipped out of the theater unnoticed, melting back into the city streets. But they were not the same people who had entered. They were armed now, not with a story or a claim, but with undeniable, irrefutable proof. They were no longer petitioners seeking justice. They were rightful owners coming to reclaim what was stolen. The balance of power had just irrevocably shifted. The days following the discovery in the vault were a whirlwind of controlled, strategic action. Lena and Mr. Abernathy delivered the trove of documents to the pro bono law firm, and the young lawyers, who had been fighting with righteous indignation, were now armed with a legal arsenal beyond their wildest dreams. Their excitement was palpable, a crackle of energy in their small, cluttered office. They worked around the clock, deposing historians, authenticating signatures, and building a legal case so airtight, so overwhelmingly documented, that it was less a lawsuit and more a historical reckoning. Viridian Dynamics, which had been so aggressive, suddenly went silent. Their campaign of intimidation ceased. It was a silence born not of surrender, but of strategy. They were assessing the damage, consulting their own army of lawyers, preparing for the war to come. Miss Thorne sent one final, terse communication. It was not a threat, but an invitation. A meeting. Her, Lena, and their respective legal counsel. No courtroom, no press. Private negotiation. "They know they can't win in court," said Sarah, the lead attorney, a sharp, tireless woman in her early 30s. "The evidence is too strong. A public trial would destroy their reputation, crater their stock price. The story of their origin is a corporate execution. They want to contain this. They want to buy your silence." The meeting was set to take place on neutral ground, in a conference room at a large, impersonal hotel. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Lena sat at one side of a long, polished mahogany table, flanked by Sarah and Mr. Abernathy. Across from them sat Miss Thorne and a team of 3 grim-faced senior lawyers from Viridian. Thorne was the picture of composure, but Lena could see the strain around her eyes, the slight rigidity in her posture. The mask was cracking. "Ms. Washington," Thorne began, her voice devoid of its previous condescension. "It appears there has been a historical misunderstanding. Viridian Dynamics wishes to rectify this oversight. We are prepared to offer you a settlement." A very, very generous 1-inch. She slid a folder across the table. Sarah opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a number on it. $100 million. It was a breathtaking sum, an amount of money that Lena's mind could barely process. It was more wealth than anyone in her family had ever dared to dream of. Mr. Abernathy placed a calming hand on her arm, sensing her shock. Sarah didn't even flinch. She slid the folder back across the table. "That's a very generous opening bid," Sarah said, her voice cool and even. "But my client is not here to negotiate the price of her silence. We are here to discuss the terms of Viridian's surrender." The Viridian lawyers bristled. But Thorne held up a hand, silencing them. She looked directly at Lena, bypassing the lawyers. "What is it you want, Ms. Washington? The money is on the table. You can walk out of this room and never have to worry about anything for the rest of your life. You can give your son the world. What more could there be?" This was the final test. Not a test of endurance, but a test of character. The money was there, a colossal, life-changing fortune. She could take it and disappear. But Lena thought of Elias's face in the photograph, his arm around his son. She thought of his words. May they build a better world with the tools I leave behind. The tools weren't just the money. The tools were the truth, the name, the legacy. Lena leaned forward, and for the first time, she spoke, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute authority. I want his name back. The room fell silent. I want the full $463 million, which represents a conservative valuation of the assets stolen from my family. Not as a settlement, but as restitution. But that is not my primary demand. She took a deep breath, her gaze locked with Thorne's. I want Viridian Dynamics to publicly acknowledge Elias Vance as a co-founder of this company. I want his name and his story to be the first thing people see when they visit your headquarters. I want his portrait hanging next to Alastair Sterling's. I want the history books corrected. She wasn't finished. And I want something more. I want Viridian to fund, in perpetuity, the Elias Vance Foundation, an institution dedicated to supporting young, underrepresented inventors, artists, and artisans. You will provide the seed money, an additional $100 million, and you will give the foundation a permanent seat on your corporate board to oversee ethical development. You will use the empire built on his genius to nurture the geniuses of the future. Thorne stared at her, her composure finally breaking. She looked at Lena not as a victim to be managed, but as an equal, a force to be reckoned with. Lena was not a poor woman dazzled by money. She was the heir to Elias Vance's will, and her will was as strong as his. You are demanding we rewrite our entire corporate history, Thorne said, her voice a strained whisper.
No, Lena replied calmly.
I am demanding you tell it for the first time. The negotiation was over. Those were her terms.
Non negotiable.
The Viridian lawyers began to protest, to argue about precedent and feasibility. But Thorne silenced them with a look. She knew in that moment that they had lost. They had come prepared to fight a battle of numbers, of dollars and cents. They had no defense against a battle of principle. They had underestimated Lena Washington one last time. They thought they were dealing with a claimant. They were, in fact, dealing with a queen, who had come not just to claim her inheritance, but to reclaim her family's throne. The aftermath was not a celebration, but a quiet, profound beginning. Viridian Dynamics, faced with the certainty of public ruin, capitulated. The agreements were signed, the funds transferred, the public statements drafted. The world learned the name of Elias Vance. His story, once a whisper, became a headline. The tale of the brilliant black inventor, erased from history by his avaricious partner, and the century-long journey of his legacy back into the light, captivated the public imagination. It was a story of injustice and redemption, of corporate greed and the enduring power of truth. For Lena, the sudden influx of immense wealth was disorienting. Financial advisors, investment bankers, and philanthropists all vied for her attention. But she moved through this new world with the same quiet deliberation she had used to clear the debris from the workshop. Guided by Mr. Abernathy and her legal team, she navigated the complexities of her new reality with grace and caution. She did not buy a mansion or a fleet of luxury cars. Her first major purchase was a simple, comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, with a big yard where Marcus could play and a small guest house for Mr. Abernathy, whom she had insisted come live with them as a permanent part of their family. She established the Elias Vance Foundation, pouring her energy into creating the institution she had described in the negotiation room. It became her life's work, a living tribute to her great-great-grandfather's spirit. The foundation provided scholarships, grants, and mentorships to young people from backgrounds like hers, kids with brilliant minds and big dreams but limited resources. It was an engine of opportunity, powered by the genius of a man who had been denied his own. Her greatest project, however, was the workshop. With a portion of the funds, she had it meticulously restored. It was not a museum but a living, breathing space. The finest tools, the best materials, the most advanced technology now sat alongside the restored remnants of Elias's original equipment. The scarred walls were stabilized and sealed, a permanent reminder of the fire that had failed to consume everything. The hole in the roof was replaced with a magnificent skylight that flooded the space with natural light. The workshop became the headquarters of the Elias Vance Foundation, a place where the next generation of creators could come to learn, to experiment, and to build. The grand piano that had lain like a fallen beast was lovingly restored by the world's finest craftsmen. Its voice returned, richer and more resonant than ever. It sat in the center of the main room, not as a showpiece, but as an invitation. The final scene of this chapter of her life was not in a boardroom or at a press conference. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon at the workshop. Lena stood by the large window watching Marcus, now a teenager, working alongside the foundation's very first scholarship recipient, a shy, brilliant young woman from their old neighborhood. They were bent over a workbench, their heads close together, deep in concentration as they worked on the design for a new kind of acoustic sensor. The air was filled with the scent of sawdust and hot solder, the sounds of quiet conversation and focused creation. The afternoon sun, streaming through the skylight, illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, the same way it had on the day she first stepped into the ruin. But now, it wasn't a symbol of decay. It was a promise of infinite possibility. Mr. Abernathy sat in a comfortable armchair near the restored piano, reading a book, a quiet, contented guardian of the past and future. Lena felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling of rightness that settled deep in her soul. The money was a tool, a powerful one, but it was not the treasure. The treasure was this, the continuation of a legacy, the redemption of a name, the quiet, determined work of building a better world. She thought of Elias Vance's final photograph, the one of him with his wife and son. She finally understood. A legacy was not something you inherit. It was something you build. She had taken the tools he had left for her and she had built a sanctuary, a haven for the next Elias Vance of the world. Her $500 gamble on a burned-out ruin had not just bought her a building. It had bought back her family's history, and in doing so, it had given her, her son, and countless others a future they could build for themselves. The silence of the workshop was broken by a single, clear note as the young student tested a frequency on a piece of equipment. The note hung in the air, pure and perfect, a testament to the enduring power of a single voice to resonate across the generations. Lena smiled. The song of Elias Vance was being written, and it was more beautiful than she could have ever imagined.